On April 9, 2026, Johnny Chandler was found guilty of first-degree rape, kidnapping, and 2 counts of sexual abuse of a child under the age of 12. There's a detail in this case that I can't stop thinking about. It's not the arrest. It's not the trial. It's not even the verdict. It's what was happening inside the small basement in his house. District Attorney Pamela Casey, a woman who has prosecuted some of Alabama's darkest crimes, said she was disturbed. Not shocked, not surprised. Disturbed. There's a difference. Shock fades. Disturbance settles in and stays. Today we are going to walk through every layer of this case. A 10-year-old girl from Blountsville, Alabama. A man her family trusted. A conviction that took 4 days of testimony, including the victim herself taking the stand and telling the world what happened to her. And we are going to examine something that almost never gets discussed in true crime coverage of cases like this one. How long this actually took. Not the investigation, not the trial, the grooming. Because this didn't begin the day she went missing. This began years before. You've heard the headline, a little girl was found hidden inside a wall in a man's house. But I promise you, there's so much about this story that you have not heard. And by the time this video is over, you are going to understand not just what happened to this child, but how it was allowed to happen, and what it took to bring this man to justice. Stay with me. This is important. To understand this case, you first have to understand the world it happened in. Blountsville, Alabama is a small town in Blount County. Population roughly 1,000 people. It is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where neighbors recognize each other's cars, where a familiar face at your door doesn't raise an alarm. That familiarity is beautiful when a community rallies around a family in crisis. But that same familiarity is also what predators rely on. Johnny Chandler was not a stranger. He was not some shadowy figure lurking at the edges of this child's life. He was known to the family. He was trusted. And according to District Attorney Pamela Casey, he had spent years making himself indispensable. He would buy her things, Casey said, and do things for her, and created a situation where she began to rely on him. Read that sentence again, slowly. He created a situation. He engineered dependence. This was not a crime of impulse. This was a crime of patient, calculated, methodical predation. Now, let's talk about what happened on March 10th, 2024. The exact circumstances of that morning are painfully ordinary at their surface. A 10-year-old girl is reported missing in Blountsville. To people in a small town, this is immediately alarming, but not immediately criminal. Children sometimes wander. Sometimes they're at a neighbor's house. Sometimes they're safe and no one has told the right person yet. But the alarm bells go off fast here, and law enforcement mobilizes fast. The response is extraordinary. Local police, state agencies, federal resources. The FBI's North Alabama Violent Crime Task Force is activated. This is not a passive search. This is a coordinated manhunt, because someone, somewhere, already has reason to believe this is serious. And then, the phone. The little girl still had her cell phone on her, and that phone pinged in Warrior, Alabama. Warrior is about 30 miles from Blountsville, not far. And that ping points investigators directly to an address, Johnny Chandler's home. Now here is the moment that I want you to hold on to, because it tells you everything about who this man is. When investigators arrived at that house, they knocked on that door, they announced themselves, and Chandler answered. He let them in, because he had a plan, according to the victim's own testimony at trial. Chandler had already told her exactly what to do when the police came. He told her to hide in the hole. She was 10 years old. She had just been violated in the most horrific way a human being can be violated, and she was now crouching inside a hollow space in a wall, in the dark, with a stuffed animal and a blanket, while the man responsible answered questions at his front door and pretended she was not there. Investigators searched the home and they found her, alive. 2 days after she was reported missing, that little girl was found alive in Warrior, Alabama, because her phone didn't lie, and because the people looking for her did not stop. But here's what the headlines didn't tell you. The moment investigators found that hiding space, that deliberate, constructed, furnished hiding space, The case against Johnny Chandler became something far larger than a kidnapping, because a hiding spot with a blanket and a stuffed animal isn't built in 2 days. That space was prepared. And that changes everything. Before we go deeper into the investigation and what prosecutors uncovered about the years leading up to this crime, I want to take a quick moment. If you are new to this channel, welcome. This is the kind of story we cover here. Not for shock value, not for entertainment, but because the only way to protect children from predators is to understand how those predators operate. Knowledge is protection. If this story matters to you, and I believe it should, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't, and share this video. Because sometimes the most important thing a community can do is make sure people are talking about a case like this. Leave me a comment below. Did you hear about this case when it happened? And what do you think about how Alabama handled the prosecution? Now, let's go back to our story. March 12, 2024, 2 days after that little girl was reported missing, and the day after she was found alive in his home, Johnny Chandler is arrested. Jail records confirm the date. The charges are red, and they are not light. First-degree rape. First-degree kidnapping. 2 counts of sexual abuse of a child under the age of 12. First-degree unlawful imprisonment and obstructing governmental operations. A charge that, in context, carries a weight that is almost unbearable to consider. Because obstructing governmental operations, in this case, means actively hiding that child from the people trying to save her. He told a 10-year-old girl to get in the hole and stay quiet while law enforcement stood at his door. That is obstruction. Now, in the days following his arrest, a picture begins to emerge. Not just of what happened on March 10th, but of what had been happening long before that. Chandler reportedly confessed. According to reportings, he admitted to picking up the child in front of her own house. He admitted to raping her. Confessions in criminal cases are legally significant, but they are also, in some ways, the least surprising detail in a case that has already told us so much about who this man is, because the confession is the end of a long story. The beginning of that story is much more disturbing. Let's talk about grooming. The word gets used often in coverage of child sexual abuse cases, and I think it sometimes loses its weight because of that. So, I want to be precise about what it means and what it looked like here. Grooming is not one act. It is not a conversation. It is a process. A gradual, often years-long process in which a predator systematically erodes a child's natural defenses. Their wariness of adults, their sense of what is appropriate, their ability to identify danger, while simultaneously securing the trust of the people around that child. District Attorney Casey was explicit about this. Chandler had a prior relationship with the girl and her family. He bought things for her. He did things for her. He created, in Casey's words, a situation where she began to rely on him. Think about what that means from the child's perspective. This is not someone who felt dangerous. This is someone who felt safe. Someone who had gifts for her. Someone who did nice things. Someone her family trusted. The wariness that we instinctively hope children will feel towards strangers. That wariness had been carefully, deliberately dismantled. That is the insidious, patient horror of grooming. By the time anything overtly criminal happens, the predator has already restructured the child's entire perception of the relationship. And here's the detail that should haunt every person watching this video. Nobody around this child would have seen warning signs in the traditional sense. Because Chandler was the community figure, he was the trusted adult. The one who showed up with kindness. How do you warn a child about someone who has been reframed as safe? We're going to look at that question carefully, because the answer is one of the most important things parents and educators can take away from a case like this. Let's now look at the investigation itself, because it is a case study in what multi-agency coordination can achieve, and also a sobering reminder of how close this case came to a different outcome. When that little girl's phone pinged in Warrior, Alabama, it was not because investigators had a hunch. It was because law enforcement had the right resources, the right protocols, and the right people working the case in real time. The FBI's North Alabama Violent Crime Task Force, a multi-agency unit that focuses specifically on violent crimes and crimes against children, joined local and state agencies in the search. This kind of coordination matters enormously. A case that might take days or weeks in a siloed investigation can move in hours when federal resources are integrated from the beginning. And in a case involving a child, every hour matters. The phone ping led them to Warrior, but the phone ping alone does not open a door. Investigators had to make contact, manage the scene, search the property, and find a child who had been instructed to stay hidden. When they found her alive. That is the outcome that this case hinges on. This child survived. And then she did something extraordinary. She talked. The victim testified during the 4-day trial. She was 10 years old when the crime was committed. She sat in a courtroom and she told the jury what happened to her. She told them how Chandler picked her up. She told them what he did, and she told them about the hole in the wall, how he instructed her to hide there when the police came. Prosecutors in child sexual abuse cases often have to build their entire case around physical evidence and forensics because child victims, traumatized and often confused by years of grooming, are unable to articulate what happened to them in a courtroom setting, or they recant, or they are too frightened. This little girl testified. That took a kind of courage that most adults will never have to summon, and her testimony, along with Chandler's own confession and the physical evidence, built a case that a jury could not ignore. 4 days of trial, and then the verdict. But before we get to that, there is one more element of this investigation that I think deserves serious attention. Something that goes beyond the facts of this specific case and cuts right to the heart of how we as a society respond when children are in danger. That hiding space. Investigators described it as a hiding space, a hole in the wall. Inside it, a stuffed animal, a blanket. DA Casey said, and I'm going to quote her exactly here because her words matter. When you look at the little hole in the wall that she was in, that had a stuffed animal and a blanket, and to know that he violated her. To me, that is disturbing. Not distressing, not troubling, disturbing. Here's what the presence of that stuffed animal and that blanket tells us. Forensically and psychologically, that space was not improvised on March 10th. You do not put a blanket and a stuffed animal in a hiding space in the hours between picking up a child and being visited by law enforcement. The logistics don't work. The psychology doesn't work. That space was prepared. It was assembled in advance. It was designed with the specific intention of keeping a child hidden. And it was furnished with items that would make a child feel, on some level, that the space was familiar, safe, not threatening. A blanket and a stuffed animal are comfort objects. They are the objects of childhood. They reduce panic. They make a small, dark space feel less terrifying. The person who put them there understood how a child thinks, understood what a child needs to feel safe, and used that understanding, weaponized it to make a child compliant even in the moment of her own concealment from rescue. This is not the work of someone who acted impulsively. This is the work of someone who planned, who thought ahead, who calculated risk and contingency. It also tells us something else. This was not the first time Johnny Chandler anticipated needing that space. If you are still here and this story touches you, please hit the subscribe button and also tell us where you are watching from. We want to connect with our viewers. Let's continue our story. I want to spend some real time here because this is the part of the case that the headlines almost entirely missed. Everyone focused, understandably, on the rescue, the arrest, the hiding space, but the psychological architecture of this crime, the why and the how of how Johnny Chandler operated, is critical information. Not because it excuses anything. Nothing excuses what he did, but because understanding the methodology of predators like Chandler is the single most powerful tool we have for protecting children in the future. Let's look at what we know about how he operated. First, the selection of the family relationship. Chandler did not target a child he did not know. He targeted a family he had access to, and then he cultivated that access over time. This is textbook predatory behavior. Experts in child sexual abuse consistently note that the vast majority of abuse is committed not by strangers, but by people known to the family, people who have spent time establishing trust before ever committing a crime. The family's trust was not a failure of judgment on their part. It was a product of Chandler's deliberate manipulation. He presented himself as safe, as generous, as helpful. He bought things for the child. He showed up. He was present in the way that we often want community members to be present for each other. He manufactured credibility. Second, the grooming process itself. According to DA Casey, this happened over years. Years, not weeks, not months. Years of incremental normalization. Years of building emotional dependency. Years of moving the line, one small step at a time, until this child's sense of what was acceptable had been so thoroughly restructured that she would follow his instructions even in the moment investigators were at his door. That instruction, hide in the hole, is one of the most psychologically chilling details in this entire case. Think about it from the child's perspective. She has been through a traumatic assault. She is frightened, and the person responsible for that assault tells her to get into a hole in the wall and stay quiet. And she does. Not because she is not intelligent, not because she is not brave, but because years of grooming had conditioned her to follow his direction, because on some level that she could not have fully articulated, the consequences of not following his direction felt more threatening than the consequences of following it. That is the enduring psychological damage of grooming. It doesn't just create an opportunity for abuse. It rewires a child's threat response system in ways that can persist long after the abuser has been removed. But here's the twist that I think genuinely changes how we should think about this case, and how we should think about cases like it. The hiding space wasn't just a practical contingency. It was also part of the grooming. Consider this: a stuffed animal, a blanket. If Chandler had built a simple, cold, utilitarian hiding space, a hole in the wall with nothing in it, and told a child to get in there during a police visit, that would be horrific, but it would also be transparently coercive. The stuffed animal and the blanket changed the dynamic. They suggest that this space had been presented to the child before March 10th as something else, possibly as a secret place. A special place. A place just for her. Something that, in the context of a grooming relationship, might have felt like a gift. A special hiding spot that they shared. And then, in the moment of crisis, it became a cage. This is a pattern that forensic psychologists who study child sexual abuse have documented extensively. Predators often create physical locations, a special room, a particular corner, a private space, that they initially frame as a gift, a secret, something special for the child. Over time, that space becomes associated with the relationship. It normalizes the dynamic of secrecy, and when the predator needs to use it for concealment, the child complies, not just because they're told to, but because they've been conditioned to associate that space with the intimacy of the secret relationship. It is one of the most sophisticated psychological mechanisms in predatory behavior, and finding it in this case, complete with comfort objects, tells us that what Chandler did was not the impulsive act of someone who suddenly made a terrible decision. It was the culmination of a long, calculated plan. DA Casey, when she described this case as one of the most disturbing we have seen, was not using hyperbole for the media. She was making a professional judgment formed over a career of prosecuting serious crimes. And the thing that made her call this case this disturbing, I believe, was exactly this: the evidence of premeditation, the evidence of patience, the evidence of a man who understood exactly what he was doing every step of the way and did it anyway. And he did it to a 10-year-old girl who trusted him. The trial of Johnny Chandler lasted 4 days. 4 days to lay out in front of a jury of his peers everything that this man did and everything that this child endured. The prosecution's case was built on multiple pillars. There was Chandler's own confession, his admission that he picked the child up in front of her house and that he raped her. Confessions are powerful, but prosecutors never rest on a confession alone, particularly in cases where defense teams may later argue that the confession was coerced or obtained under circumstances that undermine its validity. There was physical evidence gathered from the scene, from Chandler's home in Warrior, from the hiding space in the wall, from the forensic examination of the victim, and then there was the victim herself. She testified, at whatever age she was at the time of the trial, and this child deserves every protection from public identification. She sat in a courtroom and she gave testimony. She described what happened to her. She described the hiding space. She described Chandler's instructions, and she described in a way that no forensic report can replicate what it felt like to be inside that hole in the wall while the people trying to rescue her were on the other side of a door. When a child testifies in a case like this, the legal and ethical framework around that testimony is appropriately rigorous. Courts take extraordinary care to ensure that child witnesses are not re-traumatized by the experience, while also ensuring that their testimony is fully and fairly presented to the jury. Prosecutors and victim advocates work together to prepare child witnesses for the experience, to explain the process, to make them feel as supported as possible. But no amount of preparation fully insulates a child from the reality of what it means to sit in a courtroom, look at the person who harmed them, and tell the truth. That little girl did that, and the jury believed her. On April 9th, the date was not widely reported, which I think is worth noting. The verdict came back. He was guilty on all counts: first-degree rape, first-degree kidnapping, 2 counts of sexual abuse of a child under the age of 12, first-degree unlawful imprisonment, obstructing governmental operations. Every single charge, guilty. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict that reflected the totality of what Johnny Chandler had done. Not just the crime of March 10th, but the pattern of behavior, the grooming, the premeditation, the calculated use of a child's trust against her. DA Pamela Casey posted on Facebook afterward. These were her words, and I think they deserve to be in this video. This case is one of the most disturbing we have seen. No child should ever experience the fear and trauma this victim endured. While today's verdict is an important step toward justice, our focus remains on the continued healing of this child. Notice what she focuses on at the end. Not the conviction, not the victory, the continued healing of this child. Because a verdict is not the end of this story for that little girl. It is one chapter, a necessary chapter. But the healing, that is the work of years, of therapy and support and the hard, private process of rebuilding a sense of safety in a world that failed to protect her. Chandler was scheduled for sentencing on May 26. As of the time this video was recorded, that date is approaching. He is facing life in prison. DA Casey has been explicit about her sentencing recommendation. She's asking the court to run all of Chandler's sentences consecutively. Not concurrently, consecutively. This is a specific and significant legal request. Concurrent sentences mean multiple sentences run simultaneously. A person convicted of 5 offenses might serve only as long as the longest single sentence. Consecutive sentences stack on top of each other. Each count adds to the total. Casey's goal is unambiguous. She wants to ensure that Johnny Chandler is never eligible for parole. She also said something else that I think speaks to the raw emotion that even experienced prosecutors feel in cases like this one. She wrote in a Facebook comment, "If it would have been an option, I would have sought the death penalty." Alabama's laws do not currently allow for the death penalty in child rape cases where the victim survives. The U.S. Supreme Court addressed this in the 2008 case Kennedy v. Louisiana, ruling that the 8th Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment bars the execution of a person convicted of child rape when the victim survives. DA Casey knows the law. She cited what it would have been if the law were different. That is not a political statement. That is a human being, a prosecutor, a woman who looked at the evidence in this case, the grooming, the assault, the hole in the wall, the stuffed animal, the child's testimony, and felt something that legal language is not designed to contain. Before I wrap up, I want to give you something concrete to take away from this case. Because if we cover stories like this without giving people something actionable, then we've just delivered horror without purpose. Here is what the Johnny Chandler case teaches us. 1. Most child sexual abuse is committed by people known to the family. The stranger danger framework, while not useless, addresses a small fraction of real-world risk. The more dangerous situation, statistically, is the trusted adult, the family friend, the community member, the person who brings gifts. 2. Grooming takes time. If you notice an adult in your community who seems unusually interested in spending one-on-one time with a child, who gifts that child frequently, who seeks opportunities to be alone with that child, that pattern matters. It is worth paying attention to. 3. Teach children body autonomy and the right to say no, even to adults they trust. Teach them that no secret is a good secret if it involves their body. Teach them that they will not be in trouble for telling you something that makes them uncomfortable, no matter who the other person is. 4. If you suspect abuse, report it. The National Child Abuse Hotline is 1-800-4AC-SHIELD. The FBI tips line is tips.fbi.gov. These are not resources to call when you're certain. They're resources to call when you're worried. Now, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. What do you think should happen at sentencing? Do you believe consecutive sentences are the right call? And do you think the current legal framework around crimes against children needs to change? If this video added anything to your understanding of how predators operate, and I hope it did, please share it. Subscribe if you're not already, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next case. This work only reaches people if you help it travel. There are cases in true crime that I cover because they are compelling, because the puzzle is intricate, because the investigation is remarkable, and then there are cases I cover because I believe genuinely and with conviction that the public understanding of what happened matters. This is one of those cases. A 10-year-old girl from a small town in Alabama went through something that no child should ever endure. She survived it. She testified about it. She helped put the man who harmed her in front of a jury and watched that jury say, in the clearest possible terms, "We believe you." That verdict is not the end of her story, but it is a chapter that she deserved. Johnny Chandler is awaiting sentencing. The court will decide whether he ever leaves the cell again. DA Casey is fighting to make sure he doesn't, and that little girl is somewhere in Alabama, continuing the long, hard, private work of healing. I hope she finds it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring enough about stories like this to spend an hour with one of them. It means more than you know. If you want to stay informed on this case as the sentencing date approaches, subscribe. We will update you when that verdict comes in. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and look out for each other.